Before there were plagues and parted seas, before the tablets of stone and the 10 Commandments, there was a baby, floating helplessly in a basket, drifting through the reeds of a dangerous river. Born into a time of oppression, sentenced to die by a fearful king, and yet chosen by a greater king for a mission far beyond imagination. This is not just a story of miracles. It's a story of identity, of courage born from brokenness, of a man who ran from his past only to be sent back to change the future. Moses' journey is one of the most powerful transformations in human history, a journey from fear to faith, from exile to leadership, from the palace of Pharaoh to the presence of God. What can one life surrendered to God really do? Let's find out. Moses returned to Egypt, not with a crown upon his head, but with the weight of heaven on his shoulders. The man who once fled in fear now walked the dusty roads of bondage with a fire in his spirit. Beside him was Aaron, his brother and mouthpiece, and behind him the silent presence of the God who had promised deliverance. He went straight to Pharaoh's court, the very palace that had raised him, the place where power was absolute and compassion was absent. Time had passed, but the chains on the Hebrew people had only tightened. Their backs bore scars from whips. Their hands were raw from building monuments to a king who cared nothing for their cries. Standing before Pharaoh, Moses spoke not as a beggar, but as a messenger. "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go." Pharaoh laughed, not just at the words, but at the very thought that a desert shepherd, long gone from relevance, could speak on behalf of any god, let alone the God. "Who is the Lord," he scoffed, "that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." But Pharaoh's arrogance was not ignorance, it was defiance. And so began a divine showdown, not just between Moses and Pharaoh, but between the false gods of Egypt and the true and living God. The Nile, once the source of Egypt's strength, turned to blood. The fish died and the river stank. Frogs swarmed the land, invading homes, beds, and ovens. Then came gnats from the dust, then flies filling every Egyptian house. Their livestock died, boils broke out on their skin, hail crushed their crops, and locusts finished what the hail left behind. Darkness, thick and suffocating, wrapped itself around Egypt for 3 days, a darkness that could be felt. Each plague was not just a punishment, it was a revelation. God was dismantling Egypt's idols, one by one, showing his supremacy over their gods, their science, their pride. And through it all, Pharaoh's heart remained hard. Each time he was broken, he recanted. Each time the pressure lifted, he refused. The people suffered, but Pharaoh clung to power. Then came the final plague, the most devastating of all. God told Moses that at midnight he would pass through Egypt, and every firstborn son would die, from the heir to Pharaoh's throne to the child of a prisoner. But for the Israelites, there was a way out. A lamb without blemish was to be sacrificed. Its blood was to be painted on the doorposts of every Hebrew home. When the Lord saw the blood, he would pass over them. It was a night of terror and grace. The cries of Egypt filled the air as death swept through the land. But in the homes marked by blood, there was peace. That night, Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron in the darkness. "Go," he said, his voice trembling. "Leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go, worship your God. Take your flocks, your herds, and bless me also." After 400 years of slavery, the Israelites walked free. They left with gold, silver, and garments, gifts from the Egyptians who had witnessed the power of their God and wanted them gone. But more than wealth, they left with identity. They were no longer slaves. They were chosen, but freedom is never without its test. Not long after they departed, Pharaoh's regret turned to rage. He gathered his army, chariots gleaming, soldiers fierce, and pursued the Israelites. The people of God found themselves trapped between Pharaoh's army and the Red Sea. Fear took hold. "Were there no graves in Egypt," they cried to Moses, "that you brought us here to die?" But Moses stood firm. "Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry to me? Tell the people to move forward." And with staff in hand and the breath of God at his back, Moses stretched his hand over the sea. The waters trembled, then split apart. Walls of water rose on either side, and the Israelites walked through on dry ground. Behind them, Pharaoh's army charged in, but the sea would not stay open forever. At God's command, Moses stretched out his hand once more, and the waters returned. Horses, chariots, and warriors were swallowed by the sea. The oppressors were no more. On the other side, the Israelites stood in awe, not just of what they had escaped, but of who had delivered them. Miriam, Moses' sister, took up a tambourine and led the women in song and dance. The people rejoiced, but the journey had only just begun. Through the wilderness they would walk. Manna would fall from the sky. Water would pour from rocks. God would speak from the mountain, giving them commandments carved in stone. There would be rebellion, doubt, and discipline. There would be fire, cloud, and tabernacle, but through it all, God would remain faithful. Moses would not be perfect. He would grow weary, frustrated, even disobedient. He would see the promised land from a distance, but not enter it himself. And yet, his legacy would live on, not in palaces, but in purpose. Not in monuments, but in movements. He was the one who answered the call, who stood between a cruel king and a covenant God, who lifted his staff, raised his voice, and led a people out of bondage. His story reminds us that God does not call the qualified, he qualifies the called. That failure is not the end, that even in the wilderness there is purpose. That God sees our pain, hears our cries, and delivers with power and compassion. Moses was drawn from the water to deliver others from the fire. His life was not easy, but it was chosen. And so are you. What Pharaoh are you facing? What sea stands before you? What wilderness are you walking through? Take heart. The God who split the sea still makes a way. The God who called Moses still calls you. The question is not if he is able, but will you follow when he calls? If this journey moved you, share it. Let someone else be reminded that even in their wilderness, God is near. And remember, your story isn't over yet. Let my people go.